In the autumn of 1786, an English designer of theatrical sets, Philip James de Lutterberg, opened a theatre in London in the Drury Lane called the Epistemology, in which the only performers were the painted sets themselves. Using gauzes, scrims, lighting, changing lights, a series of different scenic effects would be achieved and shown. We would see the eruption of Mount Vesuvius. You could see dawn and sunset over Naples, a candlelit palace of Versailles, the destruction of the city of Gomorrah. And people would come and sit in the darkened theatre to watch these metamorphoses. And cinema can be described as a continuation of these performances of transformation. And the 19th century had a series of such performances, usually seen in variety theatres and in vaudeville performances. So, first of all, there was shadowgraphy, in which the performer would use their hands to make different shadows, and you would see a bird, a butterfly, you'd see an old woman using the fourth finger and the first finger to make the nose and the chin, and the right hand to make a hat. And what you were doing when watching these performances of the shadographers were two things. You were watching the narrative story that would unfold between the different shadows, and you were watching the transformation, the skill of the hands and the transformation into shadows on the screen behind you. Then there was chapeauism, which is a different kind of performance of transformation, in which there would be performance artists whose métier was taking a felt hat and bending it into different shapes. It would be a fisherman's hat, and then it could be bent into Napoleon's tricorn, and then into a bonnet. And again, it was the dexterity and the skill of the performer that held the audience watching it. Then there were also quick change artists, in which you would have a person on stage and a screen, and the person would start as a dandy. They'd move behind the screen and emerge on the other side as a tramp. And here the skill and the magic was the unbelievable speed with which these transformations would be achieved. That seemed inconceivable that somebody could change and transform themselves so quickly. And then there were stage magicians who would combine the hand and the skill of the hand and the speed of the hand of the shadographers together with the technical effect of the Eidaphosikon to achieve a series of transformations, of disappearances. A handkerchief can turn into a dove, a rabbit into a bunch of flowers. Now, these performers are all working both with and against time. In the Eidaphosikon, we have the speeding up of time, something that takes 2 hours. The sunset over Naples gets speeded up into a minute and a half. So the world is spun faster on its axis. But the stage magician is working with and against the time of the audience. So you have a hand drops a glove into a hat, and in the same moment pulls out a goose. Now, inside the hat itself, everything is speeded up, because you've got to open the trapdoor, you've got to drop the gloves, you've got to feel for the neck of the goose, you've got to pull the goose out, close the trapdoor in the hat, and then pull it out. All the time the speed is going on, the appearance has to be that it's as gentle as the waving left hand of the performer. And in the late 1880s, in the early 1890s, Georges Méliès was one such stage magician. And in the 1890s, he started using films in his theatrical performances. They were initially simply one out of several different performances, magic tricks, performances of transformation. And the most complicated changes, the most astonishing disappearances, changes in scale, disembodiments, could be done by simply stopping time, adjusting the world, and allowing time to continue. An action could be filmed, and then the action stopped, and the camera stopped. The actor goes behind the screen. And then when the camera is stopped, there's time for the most elaborate and leisurely of costume changes. The dandy disappears behind the screen. Then the camera is started again, and he emerges now as a lion tamer with 6 cardboard lions at his side. And when projected, the period out of time is obviously invisible, and you have the seamless movement and transformation. And most of the 500 films that Méliès made, 500 films in the first 2 years of discovering cinema, were explorations, and more than explorations, they were celebrations of these newfound prowesses of transformation. He said, I will show you a man who can take his head off. I will show you a man with a head that can be inflated like a rubber ball. I can show you a playing card that will come alive on stage. I can show you a suitcase that contains not just a piano, but a whole room of furniture, not just a room of furniture, but a whole family sitting at a dining room table and people serving them food. And then put everything back, the family, the piano, the furniture, back into the suitcase, with only the bottles left in Méliès' studio to prove that it actually had happened. Méliès' films were all made in the studio, himself as performer in front of his painted backdrops. And this is where we locate ourselves today, in the studio. As Maria Goff summarized so clearly the route we have come to today's lecture. In the first lecture, we were looking at making sense of the projections inside the cave of Plato. In the second lecture, we were extending the look at the Enlightenment, at its shadow, and also looking at photographic positives and negatives of a way of understanding the magic flute and of thinking about the Enlightenment. In the third lecture, we came down to Johannesburg, a city, and we're also talking about what it is to project onto a map, the human imagination as a form of projection. And here we arrive from the city of Johannesburg down into the studio. I referred to the cinema of Georges Méliès and his films made in the studio. And again, I would like to start today with a projection of a film against which to set the reflections that follow in the rest of the lecture. And the film we will look at is a version I made of Georges Méliès' film, Journey to the Moon. The film is 6.5 minutes long. The mid-19th century invention of photography turned time into stone. The first steps in photography relied on fixed, unmoving objects. Slow chemicals meant slow exposures. And so the camera had to hold something in its gaze for minutes for it to be imprinted on the silver-coated glass. Rocks, buildings, streets could be congealed. But objects in movement could best be detected as ghosts, disturbances in the solid objects behind them. Only the unmoving shoe polisher and his client, or a man asleep on a city bench, could force their way onto the glass. An image had to sediment itself until the photograph was thick with time. Portraits were made with the sitter's head in a clamp so that the head would not move while the photographic plate slowly absorbed that image, so that the chemical fossilization of the image could happen and the plate slowly absorbed that which was in front of it. And the development of moving photography, or cinema, at the end of the 19th century made an examination of this congealed time possible. That which was filmed and on a reel could be made to pass again. We could watch the movement again and again. And more than that, the strip of successive images could be looked at backwards, and time could be held to account. I film the flight of a bird and then reverse the projection, and I can see how the flight begins in the first spring of the legs and the first awkward spread of the wings. A history contained in a roll of film can be looked at backwards, and actions taken back to their first causes. An action done can be undone. A tear forward becomes a repair backwards. You could make a palindrome of an action and its anti-action. An action half completed, half repealed. We make Rorschach blots of intentions half made, half taken back. I start to say something, and I take it back. As if I could duk I fi sa. As if I could swallow olos duk I fi sa. As if I could swallow what I had just said. Destaj I do olos tuk I fi sa. Tnem I to ton steth. That's not what I meant. Lotat nem I to ton steth. That's not what I meant at all. Now, in the studio, I film my 8-year-old son. He takes a jar of paint, a handful of pencils, some books, some papers. He throws the jar of paint across the studio wall. He scatters the pencils, he tears the paper and scatters the shards. We run the film in reverse. And there is a utopian perfection. The papers reconstruct themselves perfectly every time. He gathers them all. He catches 12 pencils, all arriving from different parts of the room at the same moment. In the jar, he catches all the paint. Not a single drop is spilt. The wall is pristine. And his joy at his own skill is overflowing. He says, "Can I do it again?" he asks. And I said, "Yes, you can, but first we have to clean the studio, pick up the paper and the pencils, clean the paint off the wall, and then we can do it again." His delight in discovering his power to remake the world was a delight in discovering that he was more than he knew. At any rate, it was a discovery of prowess, not a demonstration of it. The film revealed to him things about himself and the world, rather than the film simply demonstrating something he already knew. And this giving over to the medium is crucial. Allowing a space for the medium to lead, giving yourself over to the play itself. Playing not in the sense of knowing the rules in advance and following them, like in a sport, but play in the sense of light on water, the play of light on water. Not a random activity, but giving yourself over to what the activity provokes and suggests, and then following these possibilities as assiduously as you can. and as assiduously as you would follow the rules of any game. They are irrational ad hoc constraints followed rigorously. Following a metaphor back to its surface rather than going from sense and hunting for the metaphor. So discovering the utopian nature of reversals is a starting point. And then the following of that provocation, the discovering of the rules of the game and the mastery of it, is a separate activity. So I walk backwards. Okay, I walk backwards. When I reverse it, my lean is wrong. I can feel that lean feels wrong. So I have to try a different lean. I walk backwards again, leaning forwards, which feels very awkward. But then when the camera runs forward, it becomes a natural walk. I lean forwards, an unnatural action to make a natural illusion of walking forwards. Now, this is the work of the studio. A constant filming, performing, reviewing, rewinding, checking, trying to find what it is in the reversal that we need to make the illusion, to make the natural forward movement. Walking and filming, leaning at different angles, testing it out when the impulse has to come before the movement, just after the movement, seeing how one can pause and advance, doing a series of ad hoc slow motion dances to try to find the logic of something that has begun. I take a book and I throw the book. Now, do I pause before the throw or do I pause after the throw? So that when the book returns, I am anticipating it, or does the book arrive of itself? Again, the book throwing has to be done in many different times and in many different ways. And this activity becomes the engine work of the studio. A series of irrational activities, ad hoc decisions, followed with as much assiduity as possible. Trying to find from the action, from the repetition of the action, what the rules of the game are and how best to play it. Now, there seem to be three different elements here. There is something to be seen, the filming of the boy in reverse, number one, that's the first element. Then the metaphoric suggestions from this, the utopian perfectibility of the world in reverse, is the second element. And the learning of the grammar, how to perform it, how to complete and enlarge on the possibilities, is the third element. The idea itself is never enough. It is its achievement that is the question. The rehearsal, the refilming, the relooking, learning how to film the final shot. A process of making and looking. But now a fourth thing appears. Remember, we've gone from the outside event, filming the sun backwards, to the second element, which is the metaphoric suggestions of it, to the third, which is the perfections of the action to make the metaphoric part clear. And the fourth element is what happens during the learning of the process, in the rehearsing, the undoing, the redoing of those actions. And that is the new set of possibilities that emerge while performing the repeated actions. The expansion of the ideas. So we start with walking backwards and forwards. This suggests already catching and throwing the books backwards and forwards, which suggests a writing backwards and forwards. Imagine a page of text that is sucked back inside the belly of the pen, so in the end you have your pen as a loaded weapon with all possibilities, and all the text is taken back to potentiality. And then the question of potentiality and its loss, and the question of regret, become a third theme, another theme which sits on top. Now, here we are talking about a trust placed in the physical, that through the physical material, and techniques, drawing, filming, walking, new thoughts and new images can emerge. About here being led by the body rather than simply the mind ordering the body about. Not random action, but action, rehearsal, performance, prompted by the discipline itself. We look at something usually taken for granted, the passage of time, the movement of a person, and in the studio we demand its deconstruction, its destruction, its shattering. Time is changed into the marked gradations and small changes we do in a piece of animation. Learning the grammar of this in the hope that we will come across new ideas. The same thing happens in performance. I referred in the first lecture to those movements, those gestures which appear in between the words, which are still part of the rhetoric of their being spoken. Those elements of speech beyond speech itself. And we can look at this further. Now, here, for example, are 6 degrees of tension in a body. We can schematize them in text, but it is clearer to see them and how they work. So we can have a first degree of tension, which is no tension. The minimum needed to stay on your feet. And with this tension, we can find a breath, a voice, and a way of finding this minimum tension. I mean, what I'm showing you is an exercise from theatre school that I last did in 1981, so we all take our chances here. But there is a second degree of tension, which is one of real relaxation, a looseness in the limbs, there's a looseness in the pelvis, there's an easy way of talking, an easy way of breathing that goes with it. It's a very relaxed, low tension. Now, when we are working on a performance, we can either start with an analysis of the text, a rational dissection of motives, a prehistory of the psychology of each character, literary references, or we can start from the practical, from the physical. A third degree of tension, neutral. I move because I'm going to move. I stop. I talk. There's no affect. There's simply an action or a word completed. So here we've gone from level 1 to a relaxed level 2 to a neutral level 3. And we can learn them as we would learn the scales. There's something that can be caught inside a muscle memory of people performing them. It's something that becomes internalized. We see it in ourselves and we can see it in other people. Now, in level 4 we have more tension. We have purpose and impulse. I cross the stage because I want to cross the stage. I want to make this clear. I mean, can you hear the difference in the voice? A connection should be made. We're getting to the heart of the matter. I want you to follow. To recapitulate. Okay, level 1. Level 2 is familiar now. It's very relaxed. Wada, wada, wada. We can say what we like. Level 3, there is no emotion. It's very clean. There are propositions. X plus Y equals 27. To level 4, where I want to explain. I want to say that X is usually 9 and Y is usually 11. That here in level 4 we have an impulse, a push behind the movement. And then we can go to level 5, which is commedia dell'arte, where every emotion is fully done. No action or no thought is neutral as in level 3. But where are we going with the argument? We're trying to find a connection that can come from leading the brain from the body, of reversing and breaking the blood-brain barrier. Emblematically here done in terms of performance and moving on the stage, but in the same way it's done when making a painting, when making a drawing, when making an etching. So on level 3, Plato, inevitably, yes, this is so. How could it be otherwise? I mean, this is a stupid exercise. I admit it, I'm in level 4, I admit this is a stupid exercise. This is foolish, level 3, whatever, level 2. This is nonsense from A to Z, level 5. But to get to sense, we have to go through nonsense, 4. To shake us out of our complacency, 5. To shake us out of complicity, 3. All right, this is a stupid exercise done in rehearsals with actors or with drawing students to show the way body can lead to thought. There is a level 6, which corresponds to no theatre, to the extreme tension in the body of breath and voice, which I'm not going to attempt. Now, in theatrical terms, this is a way of arriving at a character, of finding the psychology, of finding the movement, the breath, the voice, a way of generating not just a performance, but an interaction. If you place an actor who will not leave level 3 with someone who will not leave level 5, you already have a comedy. Make one character shift between level 5 and level 2, and you have a dog-loving demagogue. Not just the great dictator of Chaplin, but the great dictator in the films of Hitler himself. I mean, Stalin's voice in recordings is always at level 2, which is all the more terrifying for the gentleness of the voice and the gap between that and the actions behind it. Now, where are we at this point? We are in the studio with a camera, a roll of film, the performer playing the different levels of tension, the world running backwards, and looking outside the camera at what these things, this action provokes. Looking at the change from physical action into thought, at this point of transfer where a kind of reverse osmosis happens, where the action is impulse to the thought. And there is another history of cinema which can be written in terms of technologies of looking. Different kinds of pre-cinematic machines for looking, which end up with cinema, but which also are about the agency and nature of seeing. Now, let us look at 5 such technologies in the studio. The stereoscope, the phenakistoscope and all other types of zoetropes, the anamorphic mirror, the clawed glass, and the etching press. Each of these is a pre-cinematic device which takes an element of how we see, removes it from the world of naturalized, invisible vision, turns it into a material object, producing in the end a reconfigured seeing, changing both our sense of the world and our sense of self. In its most basic sense, a stereoscope brings our eyes in front of our head. In the centuries since Alberti and his treatise on vanishing point perspective, painting and image making have been a monocular activity, turning a 3-dimensional world into a 2-dimensional surface, and then finding every way from vanishing point perspective to desaturating different planes of color as they get further away, every manner to try to recreate an illusion of depth. And stereoscopes, which developed at about the same time as photography, the middle of the 19th century, are about the nature of binocularity. Biologically, we are all predators with a narrow field of vision, but an ability to see depth, as opposed to prey that have wide angle of vision but bad depth perception. To recapitulate from basics, we see everything twice. Right eye and left eye see 2 separate images, and each image obeys the Albertian rules of single-point perspective. Right eye, left eye. Close one eye, close the other eye, and images change their relative positions to us. Close one eye and the image jumps. The 2 images are then combined in our brain to make the illusion an image of the world with depth that we move through and that we take for granted. Every moment we effortlessly combine these 2 images, and this invisible double vision is what it is to see. 2 different photographs taken 3 inches apart, approximately the width of our eyes, the distance between our eyes. 2 flat images, you can hold, you can touch their flatness, it's clear, they're just photographs. But looked at through a stereoscopic viewer, which converge and magnifies the viewer and the image, we enter a strange world. The image is doubled, the 2 photographs, 2 images overlapping, and you slide the image closer and further and wait. And then there is a clear, discernible moment of transformation. The 2 become not just one image, but a door into a different space. You're no longer looking at a photograph of World War I, but are invited into the mud and the debris. Again, we can list the elements. The stereoscopic viewer has blocked off peripheral vision. It has magnified the images. Our focus is kept on the photograph. We look not across the photograph as one would look across a picture surface, but into it. And our eyes have to do the work. They have to focus at different distances. They have to converge and separate to line up the different elements in the two photographs. We have to activate the photograph itself. But most importantly, what we usually perceive as being natural becomes conscious. We are aware of our construction of this illusion of three dimensions. The brain becomes a muscle working to combine these two images, and you can feel the pressure, the work your brain does to suddenly achieve the moment of convergence of the two images. And our pleasure is, again, our pleasure at self-deception, of the transformation of what we know to be two flat images into what we know to be a false image of three dimensions. And it's also something that we sense that you can feel it in your own brain that you have done this. We are actively making the seeing. In the stereoscope, but of course in all seeing that we do, we are active participants in the construction of depth. And the stereoscope here becomes a machine for demonstrating seeing. Now, zoetropes, praxinoscopes, phenakistoscopes are all variations of machines for creating illusions of continuous movement. Through different techniques of revealing and concealing image of an action in successive stages of completion, either using two rotating discs, as in a phenakistoscope, or a rotating drum with slits in it, we take a clearly still image and are shown its transformation not from flatness to depth, as in a stereoscope, but from stillness to motion. So I film myself walking. And I photograph the action 24 times at different stages. Film the lean forward, the foot hitting the ground, the foot leaning forward towards the chair, lifting the foot, missing the back of the chair, the foot going into the air, stepping forward, the back foot lifting up, a series of still photographs of the activity of walking over the chair. Now, if I was simply to pull these photographs in front of our eyes, they would simply become a blur. But if we have a way of freezing the image briefly, showing the next one, again still, either using a shutter on the claw of a projector or the slits of a zoetrope, which have the effect of a shutter, we have a figure in motion. We can make a man climbing over
18,
the chair.
23 and 30 seconds. 18, 23 and 34 seconds. 18, 23 and 38 seconds. 18, 23.
Now, these machines are all circular. An action ending where it began, so that we can look at the spinning disc not once, but see what appears to be a continuous cyclical movement. There are zoetropes of people rowing, of people skipping. In this case, the man steps over the chair. The man steps over the chair. We come to the beginning, and again, he steps over the chair.
18, 24 and 2 seconds. 4 seconds. 7 seconds. 10 seconds.
And we have a double revelation here.
30.
The primary one, again, is of the brain as muscle, doing the work of turning stillness into movement, of making that which seems natural become a product of our own agency. And secondly, with the specifics of zoetropes, the specificity of the actual material, of this machine, we observe our seeing through them. We are aware that we are at the start and continuation of a movement. They all involve rotation, coming back to where we began, only to start the action again. The man climbs over the chair. No sooner has he done it than another chair appears. No sooner has that chair appeared than the next one comes.
59 seconds. 1 minute, 3 seconds.
This is not at the heart of the zoetrope, but what it brings with it. The idea is produced by the material. It produces that at the edge of a narrative, hoping that this time something new will happen, that he'll trip, that another chair, that someone will take the chair away. But each time he's destined to perform the same action, continuing over the chair. Now, the pressure for the protagonist to escape his fate, to be able to escape the magnetic field of the zoetrope, to leave the circular orbit, to somehow outrun his fate. We start with a visual, biological, mechanical effect, but we end with more. There is always more than the primary effect. And the invitation in the studio is to follow that more. What is in the zoetrope, what is in the shadows, what is in the landscape, to follow all the possible routes out of the studio and out of the cave. The repetition in the zoetrope is important, and repetition in the studio is important. The zoetrope and trying to escape the zoetrope. I write a list of phrases for these lectures, and the list is repeated. A list of points in the lecture as it is written: the history of cinema number 2, drawing with one eye shut, performances of transformation, chapeauism, the syllogism of printing, the illuminating shadow, running backwards, duk I fisa, as if I could. And I repeat this list 4 or 5 times in different notebooks, each time and the repetition of the phrases returning as if they are stuck in a zoetrope. Each time I expect my list of subjects and titles and topics for the lectures to change, and each time they stay the same. But in the reordering, the slight shift, the illegibility of one word, we make some new crack and some new element can enter. And this is what we are always waiting for. This repetition is also in drawing. So I make a drawing, a portrait. It's done twice, I do it thrice, and the repetition does not improve the likeness. Each time there's an allowance for the arm to lead, to let the movement of the hand to do the looking, as if the muscles of the hand, the wrist, the arm know what the face looks like, which they don't. So the drawings are assembled, and then the drawings are torn up. I tear down across a hairline, across a nose, do a tear which separates the mouth and from the moustache, and reconfigure them. The eyes too far apart are brought slightly closer. The moustache from drawing number 3 matches the mouth for drawing number 4. And the moving hand and the recognizing eye take over the work. The work that the brain does, which we can feel in the coalescing of the 2 stereoscopic images into one image, has a similarity to the physical work in the studio. The moving of the sticks, the pieces of charcoal, the mirrors, the ink. The physical action is both a provocation of the mental action, but it is also a metaphoric description of that action. In the corner of the studio, there is an etching press. And this has a double set of associations. On the one hand, domestic and intimate. There is the bed of the printing press, covered by blankets made of thick felt. That is to protect the sheet of paper under the blankets. And under the blankets, on top of the sheet, we try to make sense of the open bite, the foul bite, the spit bite, the dry point, the hard ground. There's an entire erotics of etching, which has an essential sensuousness to the process itself. There's the gentle dabbing on of the soft ground with the chamois leather dabber. The bubbles in the acid are removed with a feather. The ink is wiped off on the palm of your hand. The dampness of the paper is felt with the back of your hand. But an etching press is also a primitive machine for logic. A plate is prepared. This is the proposition. Through acid, through engraving, through burin marks, dry point scratches, the pittings with the dot of an aquatant, the smooth surface of the plate is disturbed. We ink the plate and wipe off the excess ink, and it goes through the bed of the press. the sheet of paper, the blanket. And this layered collection, the blanket, the paper, the copper, the bed of the press, passes through the rollers of the press and the paper pressed into the plate. On the other side of the roller, the blanket's removed, and we have a proof. And a proof is the record of all the damage done to the plate. If the proof does not hold out, then we have to alter the proposition. The plate must be reworked, sent back through the rollers to reveal a new proof. One thinks of all the reworking of the plates of Picasso, the reworking of the three crosses of Rembrandt. With each state, the proposition altered to produce a new proof. And so on until the final proof is accepted, given a forensic stamp of approval, BAT, bon à tirer. And the pressure at the center of this process, the meeting of the two rollers, one above the blanket, the other below the bed of the press, in the Felton blanket, is an invisible moment, hidden by the blankets themselves, and stands for the moment of transformation. The artist as maker on one side, and as observer on the other side of the press. And the best master printers, a mediator in the center between the two people. It's also a transformation of the image from copper to paper, and a transformation of one image into its mirror reversal. But behind this there is another layer of separation between the artist and the secondarily objectified print. A drawing on the plate is external to the artist, but the print itself has a different independence, strengthened by the fact or the possibility of multiplicity. And the etching and other prints are all about the possibility of multiplicity, about a private impulse becoming a public opinion. Another optical device for making us conscious of ourselves is a Claude glass, named after the French landscape painter, as if using the glass could turn us all into Claude Lorrain. A well-polished etching plate becomes a mirror. Hold up the plate and you see reflected in it a slice or a rectangle of the world behind you. Close one eye and the image becomes a two-dimensional image on the surface of the plate. Adjust your position, your arm or the plate, and the image is reframed. Hold the plate still and your eyes still, and you can transcribe the image directly onto the plate with a dry point needle, and the body becomes a crude mechanical camera. The copper becomes the photographic plate. The stillness of the hand, of the plate, and its relation to the eye are what are needed to turn the body into a camera. The stillness of the arm and the plate are crucial. And this is what reduces the infinity of reflections into the one specific image. Now, on the studio in the corner, on a table, stands a cylindrical mirror. Under the cylindrical mirror, we place a circular sheet of paper. The paper is reflected in the mirror. Draw a line on the paper, and it is reflected, distorted in the mirror. A straight line drawn becomes a parabola in the mirror. To draw what appears to be a straight line in the mirror, we have to draw a particular curve on the sheet of paper. It's counterintuitive drawing, not allowing the hand to make the familiar gestures of a lifetime, of how to make a shape. To make an image we recognize as familiar in the mirror, we have to take an elongated distortion in the drawing. We draw a rough line concentric to the edge of the sheet of paper. In the mirror, we see a horizon line. The image in the mirror becomes a landscape. Brush some charcoal dust, and we have a cloud or dust in the foreground. This is straightforward. Let it be said, there is a great pleasure in this relearning how to draw, in constructing distorted images in the surface of a corrected image in the mirror. But there are other transformations. Where does the landscape sit? Close an eye and the landscape is on the surface of the mirror. Open both eyes and the landscape floats and gathers at different depths. It's not an illusory depth of field from faint distant mountains, but a real depth. The image is somewhere behind the mirror, not on a flat plane like the drawing, but occupying space. The different parts of the image we have to focus on at different focal distances. Our eyes have to adjust to different focal distances. From one position fixed, the mirror looks like a rectangle, but we can circle the mirror and the paper reflection, and the image does not come to an end. And we are in a zoetrope. There are further and secondary anomalies and extensions. We can see 50% of the mirror, half of the cylinder, but the mirror itself can see 85% of the sheet of paper. There's an apparent distortion in the mirror, a dislocation between the mirror and the drawing it reflects. And again, we are complicit in constructing the image, in transforming the distorted drawing on the paper into the illusion of a recognizable coherence received from the mirror. And in seeing unavoidably that our relation, a physical one, to the image in the mirror is central to its existence. And then we see the more, the extra that the mirror brings to it. And we understand the world as a carousel that cannot be escaped. Another kind of zoetrope. We're aware of a circularity circling the mirror and its image. And the image shifts backwards and forwards through the invisible space at the center of the cylindrical mirror. I walk around the studio as a kind of zoetrope. And I walk past the side of the table, I go to the stepladder, I circle the camera, I go to the wash basin, I go past the balcony, past the table, turn around and reverse the journey. For 10 minutes, for an hour, this walking around the studio. Trying to gather the floating fragments, the images on the walls of the studio, the ideas that are floating in the air, to find the starting point for the drawing, for the sentence. Trying to get the fragments to pull together, to cohere. Feeling the pressure for coherence, the relationship of the history of cinema to the making of images in the studio. It becomes a kind of zoetrope of thinking. While I know that the ideas and images will only clarify themselves in the physical action of making the work, the charcoal on the paper, the ink in the book, but unable to stop the walk. Sometimes stuck while walking around the studio, stuck in a loop of a phrase that just goes round and round in one's head. So you walk around the studio and it's where you say, truth is beauty, beauty, truth. Truth is beauty, beauty, truth. Truth is beauty. There's beauty in the bellow of the blast. There's beauty in the bellow of the blast. Truth is beauty, beauty, truth. Truth is beauty, beauty. O death, where is thy sting? O grave, thy victory. Truth is beauty, beauty, truth. Stuck inside the zoetrope, and the studio has become the zoetrope. And the repetitive action cannot be escaped. Knowing that the activity is both avoiding the question of how to actually make the drawing or to write the sentence, but is also essential. A productive procrastination. And after 400 circuits, the man will finally escape his loop. He will finally stop having to climb over the chair. Now, a walk without destination has a long and an honorable history. From the ambulatories of the cloisters, which was a walk around a courtyard, to the promenades of aristocratic estates, to the passeggiata of postprandial conversation in 19th century bourgeois cities. There's something in the action of falling, of catching yourself from falling, and repeating the action. Left foot, and then the right foot, and then back to the beginning again. Left foot to the right foot. Something about the zoetrope-like repetition of walking that is productive of thinking. It becomes a truce between the artist as maker and the artist as observer. The walk encompasses both elements. Images pinned to the wall, not looked at head-on, but seen peripherally, sideways. Prods from the sideline. The books on the table with the notes for the lecture visible, though not clearly legible, but sending out waves of attraction and repulsion, reminding the artist of that which must be tackled. A walk which becomes the prehistory to a drawing. Now, what is thought turned into action, and action provoking the thought? how to put the different ideas, the different images and fragments together. And parallel to that, a thinking in material. There are two things which go on here. Thinking about to work with the torn paper, to work with charcoal, to take the image that I'd worked on yesterday to continue working on it. A magnetism of different materials and objects on the walls and shelves of the studio. Hoping to heat things up, hoping that one can make a collision between the material and an idea. And there are in fact two figures walking, going in opposite directions, trying to make sense of holding time to the world of the studio, how to squeeze an insight from the rock of stuck thought, circling the ideas, the other self in opposite directions, a hand reaching for paper, a 17-meter walk in the studio, a 14-centimeter
For reasons unknown, no
walk of
matter
the
what the
synapses.
facts are, and considering which is more grave, in the light of Labour's lost of Steinweg and Petermann, it appears what is much more grave in the light of Petermann, in the light of the plains, of the mountains, by the seas, by the
How to
rivers.
draw this collision. The circuit speeding up, trying to find a particular collision, to let all the elements reach a critical heat. Becoming a lion tamer, a horse trainer in the studio. The metaphors extending,
Given the
speeding
existence as uttered forth in the public works of Greenberg and Krauss of a personal God, qua, 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 with a great white beard, qua, 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 qua.
The camera becomes a place of
I will
holding.
I resume. Alas, alas, on short, on that abode of stones, who can doubt I will resume? Not so fast. I resume the skull to shrink and waste, and concurrently given the existence
walls of the
as
studio,
uttered
the
forth
inside of
in
the studio
public works of
speeding up,
Puncher
trying to
and
pull
Wachtman
elements
of a
from
personal
different
God,
parts
qua, qua,
of the
qua,
studio.
with a great white beard, qua, qua, qua.
Qua, qua, qua. The necessary stupidity, the two pins to draw an orbit of the stars, seeing what things can provoke an idea that could happen. The two circling men, of course, Vladimir and Estragon.
Nothing to be done. I'm beginning to come round to that view myself. All my life I've tried to put it from me, saying, Vladimir, be reasonable. You haven't tried everything. And I resumed the struggle. So there you are again.
Am I?
May one inquire where His Highness spent last night?
a ditch.
A ditch?
Where? Over there.
And didn't they beat you?
beat me? Certainly they beat
The same lot as usual?
The same?
I don't know. When I think of all these years, but for me,
Where
stop
would you be?
lathering and help me off with this bloody thing. You'd be nothing other than a little heap of bones at the present minute, no doubt about
I
it.
am
Taking off my boot. What are you doing?
Did that never happen to you?
Boots must be taken off every day. I'm tired of telling you that. Help me. Why don't you listen to me? It hurts. Hurts. He wants to know if
No
it
one
hurts.
ever
Suffers but you. I don't count. I'd like to hear what you had to say if you had what I have. It's too much for one man.
To locate where we are, in the studio, trying to parse the specific nature and activity of the studio, which can be characterized as making a safe space for uncertainty, a safe space for stupidity. And this necessary stupidity is not the same as foolishness or the innocence of the pure fool made wise through compassion. It is not the fool with license to talk truth to power. It is not simple naivety elevated. Rather, it is making a space for uncertainty, for giving an impulse, an object, a material the benefit of the doubt, following the impulses that feel stupid without a destination, believing that at some point we will emerge from our zoetrope. It is more than this. It's a repression of evaluating in advance of the action the value of the thought. Allowing three rulers to be glued together on a turntable. Allowing the work with its nonsense repeated mantras and words to take their time. Allowing that which starts as a whim to continue. To make a space for the inauthentic starting point. I mean, the stupid work of the 6 degrees of tension are there. A film is started without a script or a storyboard. A day is spent walking backwards, throwing encyclopedias over your shoulder, not in celebration of stupidity itself, but believing in it more than in a studio of good ideas, of things worked out in advance and then shot and executed. Understanding and hoping and believing not out of conviction, but from experience, that from the physical making, from the very imperfections of technique, the bad backwards walking, parts of the world and parts of us are revealed that we neither expected nor expressed until we saw them. Through the spaces opened by the foolishnesses themselves, the randomly torn pages, the line and the parabola, we both enact and see and celebrate our construction of the world. This is how I make a face. This is how we make a horse. This is how we see. And this is the work and the space of the studio. Thank you.